This meeting to order. It is Wednesday, July 30th, 2025. It's 3:00 p.m. and we're here to discuss the background check policy. And I will turn over to our prosecutor, Ben.
Okay. Well, today's meeting is a continuation from last week's meeting. Last week's meeting we ran out of time to an extent, so we continued this for about a week. And during the course of that week, my intern and I took the comments and feedback from last week. We went back to the spreadsheet, modified some columns, reworded some categories, went back to our draft policy, made a bunch of changes to the working draft, and then we pulled the remainder of the questions we didn't get to. We reviewed them, restructured a few, added a couple of different components, and created an updated list. I sent out that updated list to the commissioners, so hopefully you guys would have had a chance to at least review them, maybe ponder them, and then I thought we would see if we can power through as many of these as possible and then see what's still left or identify if there's certain questions that maybe we need outside input from other departments or elected officials on or things like that. So,
Okay.
All right, so we'll start at the top of the list. The first question we've got was one of them that we essentially left on the table last week, and that was, how do we want this process to look when it comes to reviewing the actual background check results? To reiterate, I think there's really three primary options that seem to be common. One of them is outside third-party consultant. Another option is in-house collaboration team, that review panel, etc., that serves as your screening team, I guess it would be. Last option is going to be just having the hiring official be the one that reviews it themselves and makes all their own determinations. So I think those are kind of our three common options.
Okay. Personally, I think I would think the elected official or department head would be the one to go through that.
Okay.
And then if there is a question regarding an instance that's on their, on that background check, I think they should seek legal counsel to make sure that there isn't any problems instead of trying to do it themselves. Because if there's any question, I would think that would be the way to go. Would you guys agree?
I would agree.
I think I'm a little unclear on, is the question who gets final approval in hiring or who goes through the background check?
So typically the process is separated into three components. Component number one is whoever's responsible for the position. So this elected official or department head is going to create the position. They're going to update the job description. They're going to go out and advertise. They're going to receive applications back. They're going to go through the interview process. They're going to narrow down the applicant pool plural, being optimistic. And then they're going to settle on their top candidate. They're going to say, this is who I want to offer the job to. So that's step one. Step two, in a formal structure that has a background check policy, would be they take that applicant, they forward it on to whoever's going to be responsible for the background check and say, this is my selected applicant. Now they need to go through the background check policy. And as part of that background check policy, the background check is conducted, fingerprints are taken if applicable, driving record is pulled if applicable, pre-employment drug test is conducted if applicable. So all those things are done in that middle step to determine, is this person qualified and eligible for the position. And then the last step is we've made that determination on whether or not they passed the background check, and now it's time to actually extend the formal offer for employment and bring them on board. And so that final approval is really dealing with the background check component. That's saying this person did or didn't pass the background check. So as it's written here on your question, this isn't referencing the final approval in step one, determining who we're going to pick. This is just dealing with that step two, that background check component, saying this person did or didn't pass the background check. We are or aren't going to determine they're eligible.
The way I have it currently drafted, it's like a conditional offer of employment, essentially, that's subject to them passing or being approved for the check. So they've already been selected, like Brent was saying, and it's just whether or not they can
Pass the
pass the
background.
check. Yeah,
Okay.
that's.
So that being said, Jeff's answer makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
And I would have to agree with Jeff's answer.
Okay. Next question. To what degree is each department permitted to modify the requirements of the background check policy? In other words, after we roll out this policy, there's various areas of the policy that we can say it's a black and white policy. These are yes/no questions. You either, are subject to these requirements, you're not. Or as we draft and we put this thing together, we can say we want to err on the side of being more subjective, giving elected officials and department heads more flexibility in saying we do or we don't want to put these requirements in place. And so really that's more of an art than it is a science from a drafting perspective. But in order for us to wordsmith that policy, it's helpful to have some insight in saying we want this policy to be more black and white, or we want this policy to be more gray.
I think as it pertains to the court, the security and everything else, because I know we've had some issues. I kind of like to have it more black, more solid, and if there are questions, they can seek legal advice.
Okay.
Just so that we don't end up with a problem, and then we're trying to back out of that problem. That's kind of what I'm thinking, but I don't want to overload you with.
We are here to provide a service, so whatever that service looks like is, what we get to dictate. Yeah.
Do the commissioners have the authority to set a background check policy that affects the other elected?
I would argue yes.
Okay. So, and what you just read off for question number 2 worded slightly different than what I've got, but to what degree is each department involved in the background check process? Have I just got an older draft?
You see that?
Oh, should I have to?
Yeah, she just sent me that too.
I'm going to say you guys probably have the most updated draft.
Yeah, no.
I'm probably the one with the older draft in my hand.
I think what happened,
Yeah.
Greg, is I sent you these questions
Here,
and you did the
Sydney.
last check on your email and didn't know
Here.
Yeah, I mean, form and substance is generally the same, but as you can tell, we continue to modify things and try to fine tune them as we go on.
A couple more words in the second one that I know what's in it.
Something about this.
There you go.
So how far are we going to let the other departments or elected officials modify the county process?
Yeah, so in other words, as I'm engaging in the drafting process for this policy, I can have a provision that says, each department shall analyze whether or not fingerprinting will be required for any employee. Or option B is I can say employees X, Y, and Z are subject to fingerprint, employees A, B, and C are not. Right? So we can either make it black and white in the guidance, or we can give more flexibility and discretion to the elected official.
Okay.
Yep.
And like I said, it's really more of a drafting component, but it's helpful to have input from you all. And I think that as it pertains to the structure, if we are not using an outside third party, we're not using an internal screening team, we're allowing the elected official or department head to serve as essentially the reviewer of the background check, I think we can be a little more black and white because they're going to have some of their own subjective decision making by default in the process. Whereas if it was somebody on the outside, I think it would be more of a, hey, here's the general results, now you interpret them how you want to interpret them. So,
Okay.
I see what you're talking about. So,
Yeah.
So, is an appropriate analogy would be that who's going to decide how in-depth of a background check we're going to do, the department head or the BOCC?
I mean, I think the BOCC is making that decision, and I think that before you all roll this out, I mean, this is almost always my advice. I always recommend we take new policies and procedures, we circulate them around within the department heads and the elected officials and receive input and feedback, because these are going to be these are your working boots on the ground. These are people that are actually carrying out the policy. So we want their input. I think we're going to have that piece regardless because we're going to be circulating this. What I think is just, how discretionary do we want components within the background check to be, or how black and white do we want them to be? Do we want to set specific guidelines? Do we want to be more strict in how we're implementing the background check policy? Or do we want to be more lenient and try to err on the side of giving more flexibility?
I think one of the things that we may do that at this point is go out and see what the elected officials have to say for each department, because one of them might not want to might have to do a fingerprint. One of them might have to, and say, this is what I want, and then we can put that into more of a concrete, have them help us formulate that, so then it's later on it's kind of set in stone. So kind of, get their feedback to figure out what they need, and then we can kind of set it more black later. I mean, kind of let them set it so they know, kind of get their feedback.
Well, and they have the best ideas, right? I mean, it's their department. So I think that's a really good idea for sure. Because you may have one department that's far more strict, example, the sheriff's department, naturally but that compared to the assessor, so giving them that ability to go through it and say, well, this is what we would like, for our department for background checks. Well, same with Public Works. I mean, I think that they have, with Idaho Transportation Department, they have some more strict policies in place for running equipment and, CDL. I know that they have more drug testing and things like that with Public Works. So, yeah, I think it's good to bring that out with the departments and let them all.
Yeah, in your office, the same thing, because you guys have more of a security issue with records than some of the other departments. But then some of the other departments work with money, and so I think it's going to have to kind of be
get the input from them.
So would it be fair to say the answer to number 2 is something like that? Our policy our practice is going to be to solicit specific customizing input from each department head or elected official to help create the board policy that will then be adopted countywide.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Do you think do you think that's the way that we should go, or what are your ideas on that?
Well, this question, and the reason why I'm posing it to you, is really just to solicit some ideology from you. This is more of a philosophical question than it is a concrete question. Because the drafting itself, I mean, we're going to reduce to writing whatever our recommendation is for a draft policy, and that's going to get circulated, and we're going to receive feedback on it. So if a department head or elected official doesn't like a certain provision, they're going to be able to give us that feedback and tell us why, and we're going to be able to analyze whether or not we can tweak that provision and modify it to accommodate their concerns. So I think that's always contemplated as part of the process. It's just a matter of, hey, when we sit down to start the drafting, what's the philosophy, what's the mindset of the BOCC in regards to, more black and white concrete provisions, more flexibility, ambiguous provisions. And I think there's benefits and detriments to each. It's really just a preference. So, yeah. Question 3 deals with that records retention component. Don't know if you all have had time to think through that a little more fully, vet out some of your options, but I thought we'd circle back to it. So,
my initial response is based a little bit on what we heard from the Sheriff's Department. I think we should consider keeping the results for the tenure of the employee in their personnel file, where the department head or elected, who would have already seen it, is the only one that has access to it.
Okay.
That's just my thought.
Okay.
Can I make a comment briefly? I was reviewing the policies. There's two sample policies I looked at for the counties that keep it not in the personnel file, but kind of like adjacent, because none of the counties actually allow the employees to look at their own background check results. None of them. I went and double checked to make sure, because that was a question we had. So it's only the department head or person in charge of hiring who can look at that. At least in the sample policies I have, which is I think I have 12 of them total.
So
But I
perhaps
don't know
we
if that's
could
relevant.
keep it as a file within the file.
Something
So maybe we could articulate that it's going to be placed into a sealed envelope. That sealed envelope should be marked confidential and then placed in the personnel file so it's flagged.
Okay,
Okay.
We could do something like that.
I
Okay.
think that would be.
Yeah, that would
You
work.
think
And
that?
then the only person seeing it is the one who already would have had a
Yeah,
right to see it when they hired
exactly.
anyway.
Mhm.
And I like the idea of keeping it for the length of time of the employment, in case questions come up or we have to back ourselves up
Mhm.
down the road. Or
How about for background checks for individuals who do not pass the background check and are not employed?
what would be the value of keeping them?
Probably to protect against a employment suit if that disgruntled applicant disagreed with the decision of the entity.
And how long would we need to keep it to protect for something like that?
It's a good question. I think that's probably a statute of limitations question. That would be a good follow-up research task for my intern.
Okay.
Okay.
See, I like this game. We
Yeah,
play,
it's fun, and,
you lose.
That's right. It's all good experience for me. I like it.
Yeah, and for us too.
Yeah.
Everybody's learning.
All right, next question. What conduct, if any, do we want to categorize as an automatic disqualifier for any department of the county?
Sorry, then really quick. Can I just circle back? So you want to keep the checks for the tenure of employment if they're hired, and then get rid of them after that point? Stop maintaining them after the employee is no longer with the county. Is that
That was my
is that
suggestion.
correct? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, should we look at a statute of limitations on that as
Yeah.
well?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, but
Yeah.
to look at maybe on that one as well as look at a statute of limitations after they're gone. That, so if we have to hold their file, so they don't come back.
It would likely be the same SOL. So, yeah, we'll pull some employment law codes and see if there's a specific SOL on point.
Okay.
So,
Got it.
all right. So the next question was, what conduct, if any, do we want to always be a disqualifier? And note, I've got the caveat there, if any. I mean, we don't have to have any automatic disqualifiers, but we may want some. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. It's really up to you all to decide. Hey,
Did you find any examples?
I mean, I can give you some obvious examples.
Yeah.
Murder, rape, etc.
Yeah.
So I think there's some of those that are really obvious. There's some that might not be as obvious. But you also don't have to have an automatic disqualifier. So I think that's something you can consider.
Did you see any examples of that in any of your research on
There's a couple that list certain violent felonies, like
Violent
murder.
felonies.
Yeah, kind of violent felonies is kind of a catch-all, and then there was usually an example such as
Okay.
because I think like manslaughter isn't necessarily something that would disqualify every time, right? But it all depends on the circumstance.
Mhm.
Whereas first, second degree murder.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, violent
we
felonies make
want-
sense.
Would we want to hire somebody who's going to interface with the public or represent the county who's been convicted of violent
No.
felonies.
No,
Mhm.
violent felonies should be definitely a disqualifier.
Now, is sex offender a felony?
I mean, I think it depends on how you categorize it. If we wanted to draft it broad enough to ensure we're always encompassing that, we can. Of course, Idaho's a state that does have a statutory rape provision, and there are certain rights which can be gained back under that subsection of the code. There's also certain sex offenses that don't have registration requirements, so the courts have looked at those and said they're not as serious as others. So there are varying levels of offenses in that category, I think.
Are we getting into a sticky wicket if we put things in this category?
You've just got to be able to justify why you believe for public safety or otherwise it's a necessity for your policy.
If somebody did something like that when he was 16, would that show up 20 years later on a background check? If it
It could.
could, but not necessarily.
Depends on how it was charged.
Right. Well, I would be in favor of limiting violent felonies. I just, if we're talking about for the safety of the employees and the safety of the public,
I would agree.
I don't know if that's specifically legally specific enough to be useful.
We'll work on identifying a definition for that to propose to you. All right, next question. Would we ever have a need to simply review a driving record without ordering a criminal history? In other words, are there any positions in the county that we maybe aren't concerned with whether or not they've committed any crimes, but we're just concerned with how they drive?
If the last one were true, then how could this one, if we've already said we need to know if you've ever done a violent crime, then we'd have to check everybody.
I would say you have to check everybody, because no matter what, you're working with the public one way or another.
Okay. So with that understanding, that means that we're going to have all county employees at all levels for all departments have to undergo a background check. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just clarifying.
Yeah.
I would think so.
Okay. Okay. So then that.
Because if we don't, that's always the other thing is we don't, and something
miss
really
one.
popped up
Something
and
happened.
Yeah.
that we could be liable for. I think it's probably safe to.
Yeah.
Have we addressed the how often? Like when I worked for DOD, I had to go through this every 5 years.
Yeah, so that's one of the questions that we've got on the spreadsheet, which we talked about briefly last week, and that is based upon the likelihood of a particular employee or position within the county being subject to a higher standard. We have certain positions that we would contemplate redoing a background check or revisiting their criminal history every so many years. But typically from our review, entities that have that type of a policy reserve those ongoing checks for kind of this very small subcategory of positions that they deem are most subject to criticism for future criminal conduct. So like law enforcement, that's an area that we often see that type of a requirement that's ongoing. And candidly, I think we could probably look at the various positions and say, all right, well, if a position just requires a standard background check over here, but this position requires an advanced background check, maybe the advanced background check is the type of position that we would come back and revisit every 5 years because of how we've categorized that employee. So I don't know that we would necessarily need to make a separate finding Because I think if we make that finding at the beginning, when we're determining initially what type of background check, we subsequently could be making the second finding, which is this the type of position that would be subject to ongoing background checks in the future?
Even your lower level, all we really cared about was does he have any driving history, because he's going to have a CDL. So he passes the background check, we hire him or her, and a year later they go to Washington, have a party, and get a DUI. And now we got the very thing we tried to avoid. We got a guy with a DUI driving for us, and we don't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
How do counties catch that kind of thing?
Well, first off, I'd say you have a prosecuting attorney's office that's highly connected to the community and typically catches wind of it, which is how all the instances since I've worked for the county have been caught. Could you implement within your personnel policy a mandatory disclosure clause? You could. You could mandate that employees disclose any misdemeanor or higher level offenses.
Okay.
What happens if the person doesn't disclose it? Well, then you're still counting on the fact that you caught it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're hypothetical about the going to another state, you never knew about it. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, as the old adage goes, so that would be moot in that context, but you certainly could put that type of an obligation on your employees within the personnel policy. The other thing is, and I think you kind of maybe hinted at this, Dave, whether you realized it or not, but is there a benefit to doing ongoing background checks for employees? Sure there is. Is there a benefit to doing background check policies for all employees? Sure there is. If we're talking about what's the maximum amount of protection we could give to the county, well, we would do background checks all the time for everyone, then we would always catch everything. But there's a cost associated with that. And so that's what we're trying to balance, or at least that's what I'm trying to balance as I'm asking some of these questions. I'm saying, you guys tell me what you want to do, because if you're just asking me, hey, Ben, draft the safest policy possible, it'll cost us $1 million.
Right.
But we've got to work within a budget, and we're trying to be mindful of, okay, there's cost associated with these things. So we're just trying to balance them and saying, hey, how much of an emphasis do we want to put into this, and what's going to be the associated cost of that emphasis?
I like the idea of the disclosure, where they disclose it,
Okay.
mandatory disclosure, because that kind of gives us, takes the liability off of us and kind of puts it on them, to be honest. And
Yeah.
I don't know how that would work. And I remember that because I think if you deal with a lot of money too, they do background checks every 5 years. But I don't know, or we have elected officials that do that, so I don't know how we can't do that.
I'm thinking of a particular case from my other job, my background, where a Christian school did a background check on employment and then didn't do anything else. And 5 years in, one of their teachers committed a sex offense, and it did not come to the knowledge of the school until he did it again at the school. And then it turned into a lawsuit because parents found out they retained a sex offender for several years and didn't have any way of catching that. So if our whole point in this is to make sure we're not hiring people that pose a danger to the public, I understand the balance thing. I'm just trying to figure out, but why put something in place if you can get around it too easily?
Yeah, you bet. So is it the thought of the commission to maybe have the reoccurring background checks be for all employees, regardless of how we've categorized them?
You mentioned an idea a while ago of tying that to the level of background check.
Mm-hmm. And the primary reason for that, from my perspective, was just to try to keep costs down.
Yeah.
Well, there's some
Um,
logic to that. So the higher risk your job is, the more often we should maybe. So if we're going to go ahead and put people into higher risk category and lower risk, maybe those lower risk are every 5 or 10 years, and those higher risk are every 3 or 5 years or something.
Okay.
I mean, why not break that up at the same time and say, if you're dealing with millions of dollars and just expect you're going to get a background check more often. Do you need a background check to work in deficits? Because we have a lot of those,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't steal those.
What the other counties do? Was there any for ongoing background
Ongoing
checks?
checks? Honestly, there was only 2 other counties that have a dedicated background check provision. The rest is just working with their personnel policies. Most of them, they just say employees will be subject to a background check. And it's 3 lines. The big ones, I would have to double check the file to be sure about this, but I think they just say as determined by the county. Certain employees may be subject to ongoing checks as determined by the county.
Which is what we're doing, and we're just doing it up front.
Right. So it's kind of vague as far as I can tell.
And as a disclaimer, so when Isaac references other counties, it's not like we go out and we pull every one of the 44 counties and examine.
Yeah.
Isaac's doing a cross-reference. He's going out and grabbing a handful of them, so at least he has some basis
Yeah.
to look at.
Yes.
I don't recall off the top of my head exactly which counties he pulled, but if that was something that he wanted a more in-depth analysis on, we definitely could go pull more counties and review. So if that ends up being a concern, or if we end up having some discrepancy or disagreement on how we should structure that provision, we can always go out to the research table and pull more samples. And
I tried to pull several from the biggest and the smallest counties just to get a
Okay.
good cross-reference.
Okay.
And like I said, I have 2 that are dedicated background check policies, standalone by themselves, and then the rest are just worked in the personnel. So,
I think we have to also kind of